darkness that swallows everything in its path. I was on the road, driving through the seemingly endless expanse from Texas to Pennsylvania. My eyes were heavy, monotony of the highway threatening to lull me into a dangerous sleep. As I approached Dallas, I decided to stop for a quick bite, hoping a break would shake off the fatigue. The diner was nearly empty, fluorescent lights flickering ominously. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee when a man approached me. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. His clothes were worn and stained, and he carried 2 long, heavy bags slung over his shoulders. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice a low growl. I nodded, more out of politeness than desire for company. He dropped his bags with a thud and slid into the seat across from me. For a moment, we sat in uncomfortable silence, the diner's hum the only sound. "I need a ride," Hanley said, his eyes never leaving mine. "All the way to Pennsylvania." I frowned, my instincts screaming at me to refuse, but there was something in his gaze, something desperate and unsettling. He went on to explain that he was heading to a political rally, dream he'd harbored since 2017. His fervor was unnerving. "I can help with gas," he offered, as if that settled everything. Every fiber of my being told me to decline, to make some excuse and leave him there. Memories of past mistakes and a strange sense of obligation gnawed at me. I'd been in a similar situation once, stranded and in need of help, and someone had extended a hand. Took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but no funny business." Grinned, a crooked, unsettling smile. "You won't regret it," he assured me, though his tone suggested otherwise. We left the diner, the weight of his bags echoing ominously as they hit the back seat. As we drove off into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a grave mistake. The road ahead seemed darker, more foreboding, and I couldn't help but glance at him from the corner of my eye, wondering what secrets those heavy bags held. The miles stretched on as we plunged deeper into the night, the rhythmic thump of the tires on the asphalt becoming an unsettling mantra. The man, who had introduced himself only as Frank, sat in eerie silence beside me, staring out into the void. The weight of his bags in the back seat felt like a tangible presence, constant reminder of the unease gnawing at my gut. I tried to make small talk, but every attempt was met with curt, cryptic responses. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had an air of desperation, yes, but also a cold, calculating look in his eyes that sent shivers down my spine. "Why Pennsylvania?" I asked, breaking the heavy silence. "It's where it all ends," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I glanced at him, confused, but he didn't elaborate. As we continued, he began to talk more, but his words only deepened my unease. He spoke about the rally with an obsessive fervor, detailing plans he'd apparently made years ago. His eyes lit up with a manic gleam as he described how long he had waited for this moment. "It's been my dream since 2017, he said, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. "To see him, to be there in person. It's important." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. His intensity was unsettling, and there was a dangerous edge to his words. I tried to steer the conversation to safer topics, but he always brought it back to the rally, to the politician he spoke of with both reverence and disdain. "It's funny, isn't it?" he mused at one point. "How one man can hold so much power over so many lives. It's almost criminal." I forced a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Politics can be like that," I said weakly. He turned to me then, his eyes boring into mine. "They all deserve what's coming to them," he said softly. "Every last one." Chill ran down my spine at his words, but I kept my eyes on the road, pretending not to notice the dark look that crossed his face. There was something deeply wrong with this man, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. As we passed through small, sleeping towns, Frank's demeanor grew more agitated. He fidgeted constantly, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on his knees. He muttered to himself, words I couldn't quite catch, but that sounded like dark promises and grim resolutions. The darkness outside seemed to press in on us, the road ahead an endless ribbon of black. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something sinister lurking in the shadows. But it was only Frank's bags, ominous and silent, their secrets hidden within. I tried to focus on driving, on keeping my composure. The sense of dread was overwhelming. Every mile brought us closer to Pennsylvania, closer to whatever terrible plan Frank had in mind. And with every mile, my fear grew. A dark, insidious thing that clawed at the edges of my sanity. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, Frank's face looked like a specter, pale and haunted. I couldn't help but wonder what darkness lay within those bags, and what horrors awaited us, the end of this journey. The night was far from over, and as we hurtled through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving straight into a nightmare, from which there was no escape. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of blackness bordered by the occasional flicker of distant lights. Frank had finally succumbed to sleep, his head lolling against the window, his breaths coming in slow, ragged patterns. I stole glances at him, my mind racing with anxiety and suspicion. With his eerie mutterings still echoing in my ears, my eyes darted to the back seat where his bags lay. Something about their presence gnawed at me, an itch I couldn't ignore. What could be so heavy, so crucial, that he would drag them across the country? My curiosity wrestled with my fear until I couldn't stand it any longer. I took a deep breath and glanced at Frank, making sure he was still asleep. His snores were soft but steady, giving me a small window of opportunity. With trembling hands, I reached into the back seat and carefully unzipped one of the bags, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake him. The bag opened with a quiet hiss, revealing its contents. My blood ran cold as I stared at the disassembled pieces of a high-precision rifle, each part meticulously packed. I recoiled, nearly swerving off the road in my shock. This wasn't just any rifle. It was a weapon designed for one purpose: precision killing. My mind raced, connecting dots that led to a terrifying conclusion. Frank's obsessive talk about the rally, his hatred for politicians, the eerie finality in his words. It all made a chilling kind of sense. He wasn't just attending the rally. He was planning something catastrophic. Panic surged through me, a tide of dread that threatened to pull me under. What was I supposed to do? I was miles away from any town, trapped in a moving car with a potential killer. Calling the police seemed impossible without alerting him. My options were rapidly dwindling. Frank stirred in his sleep, a low groan escaping his lips. I froze, holding my breath, praying he wouldn't wake up and catch me rifling through his things. After a few tense moments, he settled back into his slumber, oblivious to my discovery. I forced myself to think rationally, to quell the rising tide of terror. I needed a plan, something to keep both of us safe until I could find a way to alert the authorities. I zipped the bag back up, my fingers numb with fear, and returned my focus to the road, my mind racing. The miles crawled by as I weighed my options, each one more dangerous than the last. The rifle in the back seat was a ticking time bomb, and Frank was its volatile trigger. I had to keep him calm, had to pretend I didn't know about his sinister cargo. As dawn began to break, casting an eerie light over the desolate landscape, I felt a glimmer of hope. Daylight brought with it a sense of safety, chance to find help without the oppressive cloak of darkness. But it also meant we were closer to our destination, closer to whatever nightmare awaited at the rally. Frank stirred again, this time waking fully. He stretched, yawning, and looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes. "Almost there?" he asked, his voice a jarring reminder of the danger I was in. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Not much longer now." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and turned his attention back to the window. I breathed a silent sigh of relief, but the tension remained, coiled tight in my chest. The end of this journey was approaching, and with it, the potential for unimaginable horror. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, determined to survive, determined to stop whatever terrible plan Frank had in store. The road ahead was fraught with danger. I could only hope I had the strength to navigate it. As the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, the landscape shifted from an impenetrable black to a murky gray, casting long, ghostly shadows across the road. A sense of foreboding lingered, a dark cloud hanging over us as we drew closer to Pennsylvania. Frank had become more talkative, his earlier silence replaced with an unnerving eagerness. He spoke with a feverish intensity, his words sharp and unsettling. Each sentence was laced with venom, a deep-seated hatred for politicians that made my skin crawl. "They think they're untouchable," he spat, his eyes burning with an almost fanatical zeal. Sitting in their ivory towers, making decisions that ruin lives. They deserve what's coming. I nodded, trying to mask my fear with a semblance of agreement. It's frustrating for sure, I said, my voice shaky. But violence isn't the answer. He laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. Isn't it? Sometimes it's the only answer that gets their attention. My mind raced, desperate to find a way to defuse the situation. Maybe, I said cautiously, but there are other ways to make a difference. Protests, petitions. Protests, he interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. Petitions. They don't care about those. They only care about power, and sometimes power needs to be met with force. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The weight of his words was suffocating, each one a dagger of dread. I needed to keep him talking, needed to find out more about his plans without pushing him too far. What about this rally? I asked, trying to sound curious rather than terrified. Why is it so important to you? He leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. For a moment I feared I'd overstepped. Then he sighed, a weary, haunted sound. It's my chance, he said quietly. My chance to make them see, to show them that their actions have consequences. A shiver ran down my spine at his words. There was a chilling finality to them, a sense of grim determination that made my heart pound. I needed to find a way to stop him, but I was running out of time and options. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the road ahead, we passed through small towns and quiet stretches of countryside. The world seemed peaceful, oblivious to the darkness sitting in my passenger seat. Each mile brought us closer to our destination, closer to whatever horrific plan Frank had in mind. He grew more restless as we neared Pennsylvania, his fingers drumming incessantly on his knees. His eyes darted around, predatory gleam in their depth. I could feel the tension radiating off him, a palpable, suffocating presence. Almost there, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Just a little longer. I forced a smile, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Yeah, not much further now. As we approached Butler, the town where the rally was to be held, my pulse quickened. The reality of the situation crashed over me in waves of panic. I had to do something. Had to find a way to prevent the catastrophe that Frank was so intent on unleashing. But how? How could I stop a man who was clearly unhinged, armed, and determined? The weight of my discovery in the back seat loomed over me, grim reminder of the stakes. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and I was navigating a minefield with no clear path to safety. But I couldn't give up, and let fear paralyze me. Frank's dark mutterings filled the car as we drove into Butler, town slowly waking to the new day. I had to stay calm, had to keep my wits about me. The nightmare was far from over, and I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The town of Butler emerged from the morning mist like a specter, quiet and unassuming, its streets lined with quaint houses and sleepy storefronts. But beneath its tranquil facade, I could feel the undercurrent of impending doom. A silent tension seemed to hum in the air. Frank's agitation had reached a fever pitch. He was a live wire, crackling with nervous energy, his eyes darting around as if expecting the world to change in an instant. The closer we got to the rally site, the more erratic his behavior became. Just up ahead, he muttered, pointing toward a distant building that loomed like a shadow against the brightening sky. That's where it'll happen. My heart pounded, each beat echoing like a death knell. I kept my face neutral, masking the terror that clawed at my insides. What's your plan? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, casual. He glanced at me, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but his need to share outweighed his caution. You'll see, he said, a sinister smile creeping across his lips. It's going to be unforgettable. As we neared the building, he directed me to a side street, away from the prying eyes of early risers and the growing crowd gathering for the rally. The building was tall, its brick facade weathered and imposing. It was a perfect vantage point, providing a clear line of sight to the stage where the politician would soon speak. Stop here, demanded, his voice sharp. I obeyed, pulling over to the curb, my mind racing with dread. I grabbed his bags from the back seat, his movements quick and practiced. Wait for me, he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. This won't take long. As he slipped out of the car and disappeared into the building, my mind screamed at me to drive away, to escape while I still could. But the weight of responsibility anchored me in place. I couldn't let him go through with his plan. I couldn't let innocent lives be lost. Minutes dragged by, each one an eternity. I glanced at the building, my thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I needed to act. And I needed to act now. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had, and stepped out of the car. The air was cool, carrying the distant murmur of the gathering crowd. My legs felt like lead as I approached the building, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open with a sinister groan, and I slipped inside, the dim interior swallowing me whole. The narrow staircase loomed ahead, winding upward like the path to some dark, forbidden place. I climbed, each step echoing in the silence, my breath shallow, and at the top I found a door ajar, leading to a small, dusty room. Frank stood by the window, his back to me, meticulously assembling the rifle with a precision that spoke of grim purpose. The pieces clicked together with a chilling finality. I hesitated, fear paralyzing me for a split second. But then I saw the scope, the barrel aimed at the rally site, and the crowd beyond, oblivious to the danger lurking above them. A surge of adrenaline propelled me forward. "Frank, don't," I shouted, my voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. He spun around, eyes wild with shock and rage. "What are you doing here?" he snarled, raising the rifle toward me. In that instant, time seemed to slow. I lunged, my hands striking the rifle, knocking it from his grasp. It clattered to the floor, the sound reverberating through the room. Frank lunged at me, his face contorted with fury. We struggled, chaotic tangle of limbs and desperation. He was stronger, fueled by his madness, but I fought with the strength of sheer terror. Somehow, I managed to pin him down, securing his hands with a length of rope I found nearby. As he thrashed and cursed beneath me, I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. "I need the police," I said, my voice shaking. "There's a man with a gun at the rally. He's restrained, but we need help now." The operator assured me that officers were on their way. I stayed on the line, my eyes never leaving Frank's, his face a mask of unbridled hatred. The sound of sirens grew louder, a beacon of hope cutting through the oppressive fear. Moments later, police officers burst into the room, their guns drawn. They took Frank into custody, his curses turning to desperate pleas as they led him away. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with a lingering dread. The nightmare was over, but its shadow remained, dark stain on my soul. As I walked out into the daylight, crowd cheered, oblivious to how close they had come to tragedy. But I knew, and I would never forget. The relief that had washed over me in the aftermath of Frank's capture was fleeting, replaced quickly by a lingering sense of unease. The town of Butler buzzed with activity, the rally proceeding as planned, crowd blissfully unaware of how narrowly they had escaped disaster. I found myself in a haze, the adrenaline crash leaving me disoriented and drained. I was seated on the steps of the police station, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hand. Officers moved about, their voices a low murmur in the background, discussing the would-be assassin and his deranged plans. A detective approached me, his face a mask of concern. "You did a brave thing," said, voice steady. "But we need to know more about him. Did he say anything else during the drive?" I recounted the journey as best I could, every cryptic remark an ominous mutter, my words tumbling out in a rush. The detective listened intently, jotting down notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. As I spoke, a nagging thought clawed at the back of my mind. There was something I hadn't mentioned, something that didn't quite fit. The bags. I had only looked in one of them. What if there was more? What if the rifle wasn't the only weapon? "Did you search his bags thoroughly?" I asked, my voice trembling. The detective looked up, his expression darkening. "We found the rifle, but we'll need to take another look, just to be sure." A chill ran down my spine. The idea that something could still be lurking, hidden and dangerous, gnawed at me. The detective excused himself, and I watched as he and a few officers returned to the station, their faces set with grim determination. Minutes stretched into hours as I sat there, the weight of the morning pressing down on me. The rally continued in the distance. Cheers and applause, a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that Frank's shadow still loomed large. The detective returned, his face pale. He motioned for me to follow him back into the station. Inside, the air was thick with tension. On a table lay Frank's bags, now fully unpacked. My stomach lurched as I took in the contents. Explosives, meticulously crafted, powerful enough to cause unimaginable destruction. My breath caught in my throat as I realized how close we had come to an even greater catastrophe. Jesus, the detective muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. This could have leveled half the town. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in like the grip of a nightmare. Frank's plan had been far more elaborate, far more sinister than I had imagined. My mind raced, trying to piece together his intentions, the depths of his madness. Why would he bring all this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Detective shook his head. We'll have to question him further. But one thing's clear, you stopped something truly horrific today. His words offered little comfort. Horror of what might have been was overwhelming. Dark cloud that refused to lift. I left the station, the weight of the morning's events bearing down on me. As I walked back to my car, the crowd at the rally began to disperse, the threat of danger dissipating like morning mist. But for me, the terror lingered, a shadow that clung to my thoughts. The drive home was a blur, the road stretching out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out, threatening to pull me back into the nightmare. When I finally arrived home, the familiar surroundings offered little solace. The events of the day played over and over in my mind, a relentless loop of fear and what-ifs. I knew sleep would not come easily, if at all. As night fell, I sat by the window, the darkness outside a mirror of the darkness within. Frank was behind bars, his plan thwarted, but the unease remained. Constant, gnawing presence. I had faced a monster and survived, but the scars were deep, and the shadow of that fateful journey would haunt me for a long time to come. The silence of my home was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. Yet, it offered no comfort. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows felt charged with an eerie, almost malevolent energy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. As the night deepened, I found myself unable to sit still. I paced the rooms of my house, my mind racing with fragments of the day's events. The image of Frank, his eyes burning with madness, haunted me. I could still feel the weight of his presence, like a dark cloud hanging over my shoulder. I turned on the television, hoping for some distraction. The news was filled with coverage of the thwarted attack, the talking heads praising the quick action of the police, and the unnamed Good Samaritan who had prevented a tragedy. Their words felt hollow, echoing through the room, without truly reaching me. A sudden knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. My heart leaped into my throat as I approached cautiously, every nerve on edge. I peered through the peephole and saw the detective from earlier standing on my porch, his expression grave. I opened the door, my voice shaky. "Detective, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," said, his tone somber. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him in, my mind racing with possibilities. Had they discovered something new? Was there more to Frank's plan that I hadn't uncovered? He sat down at the kitchen table, and I followed suit, my hands trembling. "We've been questioning Frank," began, his eyes meeting mine. "He's not exactly forthcoming, but we did find something in his belongings that we thought you should know about." He pulled out a small, worn notebook from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. The pages were filled with cramped, chaotic handwriting, diagrams, and lists. "This is his journal," the detective explained. "It's filled with details about his plans, his motivations. There's one entry that stood out." He flipped to a page near the middle and slid the notebook toward me. My eyes scanned the text, and my blood ran cold. Frank had written about me, how he had chosen me specifically, how he believed I was meant to be his accomplice. His words were filled with delusional ramblings about fate and destiny, how our paths were intertwined. "He believes you're part of his mission," the detective said quietly. "He thinks you were sent to help him." A shiver ran down my spine. The idea that Frank had singled me out, that he believed I was somehow complicit in his twisted plans, was beyond horrifying. "What do I do?" I whispered, feeling the walls close in around me. "We've increased security at the station," the detective assured me. "Frank won't be going anywhere, but we wanted you to be aware in case he has followers," I finished for him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The detective nodded grimly. The thought that there could be others out there sharing Frank's delusions was almost too much to bear. "I'll be fine," I said, more to convince myself than him. "Thank you for letting me know." He stood up, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Stay safe, and if you notice anything unusual, call us immediately." After he left, I locked the door and double-checked the windows, every shadow now a potential threat. I tried to calm my racing heart, but the fear had dug in deep, its roots entwining around my thoughts. As I sat back down, my eyes were drawn to the notebook. Against my better judgment, I opened it again, poring over Frank's deranged scrawl. His plans were meticulous, each step detailed with a chilling precision. But it was the personal notes, the references to me, that shook me to my core. He had watched me for weeks, noting my routines, my habits. He had decided I was the perfect candidate for his twisted vision of justice. The realization that I had been oblivious to his surveillance was a dagger to my sense of safety. Hours passed as I read, the night deepening around me. The house creaked and groaned, settling into its nocturnal rhythms, but every sound set my nerves on edge. I was trapped in a web of paranoia, every shadow a potential threat. When I finally closed the notebook, the first light of dawn was creeping through the windows. Exhausted, I stumbled to my bedroom, hoping for a few hours of restless sleep. But as I lay there, the echoes of Frank's madness whispered in the corners of my mind, refusing to let me go. The terror was far from over. The days that followed were a blur, a twisted blend of fear and paranoia. Each moment seemed to stretch into an eternity, every creak of the house magnified into a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that Frank's influence still lingered, dark shadow haunting my every step. The detective had assured me that Frank was securely locked away, but his words did little to soothe the gnawing unease that had taken root in my mind. I found myself jumping at shadows, my nerves frayed and my sleep plagued by nightmares. Frank's journal, with its twisted prophecies and meticulous plans, had left an indelible mark on my psyche. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the oppressive silence was shattered by the sudden ring of the phone. My heart raced as I picked up the receiver, the voice on the other end immediately recognizable. "It's me," the detective said, its tone urgent. "We need to talk. Now." He arrived at my house within minutes, his face pale and his eyes haunted. "There's been a development," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We received a letter at the station today. It's from Frank." My blood ran cold. "How is that possible? He's in custody." The detective shook his head, his expression grim. "We don't know, but the letter is addressed to you." He handed me a crumpled envelope, my name scrawled across the front in Frank's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it, my eyes scanning the contents. The letter was a chilling testament, Frank's unyielding madness. He wrote of visions and destiny, how his mission was far from over. He spoke of followers, people who believed in his cause, and how they would continue his work. "We cannot escape fate," he had written. "Our paths are intertwined, and the end is yet to come." The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in with a suffocating weight. I looked up at the detective, my voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" "We're increasing surveillance," he said, his tone firm. "We're not taking any chances. But you need to be careful. Watch your surroundings, trust your instincts." The days turned into weeks, each one a test of my endurance. I went through the motions of daily life, but the specter of Frank's threat loomed large. Every stranger on the street, every unexpected sound sent a jolt of fear through me. One night, as I lay in bed, the darkness seemed to come alive with whispers. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, soft and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the baseball bat I kept by my bed. I crept toward the door, my breath shallow and my grip tight on the bat. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I swung the door open, my heart in my throat. The hallway was empty, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I let out a shaky breath, lowering the bat. But as I turned to go back to my room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A note, pinned to the wall with a knife. My name was written on it, the handwriting unmistakable. Soon. Read. Very soon. I backed away, my mind racing with fear and confusion. How had someone gotten into my house? The locks were secure, the windows closed. It was as if the shadows themselves had conspired against me. The next morning, I called the detective, my voice trembling as I recounted the events of the night. He arrived with a team, combing through my house for any signs of an intruder. They found nothing, no evidence of forced entry, no clues to who might have left the note. We'll keep a closer watch, the detective assured me. But you need to stay vigilant. Days turned into nights, line between reality and nightmare blurring. I was a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the fear that Frank's followers were closing in. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every whisper a promise of impending doom. And then, one night, the final confrontation came. I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass, unmistakable crunch of footsteps in the living room. My heart raced as I grabbed the bat, creeping toward the source of the noise. In the dim light, I saw a figure tall and menacing, moving through the shadows. My grip tightened on the bat as I took a step forward, my voice trembling. Who are you? What do you want? The figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of their face, a mask, white and expressionless. The sight sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stand my ground. I won't let you continue Frank's work, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This ends now. Masked figure laughed, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the room. You think you can stop us? They said, her voice distorted by the mask. You are merely a pawn in a much larger game. Before I could react, it lunged at me, the knife gleaming in the dim light. I swung the bat, the impact jarring through my arms as it connected with their shoulder. They stumbled back, quickly recovered, their eyes burning with determination. The struggle was fierce, a chaotic dance of survival and desperation. The masked figure was strong, their movements precise and deadly, but I fought with everything I had, driven by the primal instinct to survive. Finally, with a desperate swing, I knocked the knife from their hand, sending it skittering across the floor. I tackled them to the ground, pinning them with the bat pressed against their throat. Who are you? I demanded, my voice a mix of fear and anger. Why are you doing this? The figure struggled beneath me, but I held firm. You'll never understand, they spat. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. Sirens wailed in the distance, the sound growing louder. Police arrived moments later, bursting through the door and pulling the masked figure away from me. As they were led out in handcuffs, I sank to the floor, exhaustion and relief washing over me. The detective approached, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. You did it, he said, his voice filled with genuine relief. It's over. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. The shadow of Frank's madness would linger, a dark stain on my soul. But for now, the immediate threat passed. As the dawn broke, casting its first light through the shattered windows, I knew that life would never be the same. Terror had left its mark, but I had survived. And in that, there was a glimmer of hope. The darkness had not won, and perhaps in time, the shadows would fade.